All right. Hello, this is Dr. Brandon, and here we're going to talk about Gaunilo's objection to Anselm's ontological argument. This is a very famous objection. Gaunilo he was from Marmoutier, which I think is in France, and he lived in the 11th century, so at the same time as Anselm, and he was a monk. And so what might have happened is when Anselm published his book, that means he had some scribes make some copies, and they sent it out to other monasteries and religious institutions. And so Gaunilo probably heard it read out loud at some point, and he didn't think it was right. He thought there was a deep flaw in the argument. Now, that doesn't mean that Gaunilo thinks that God doesn't exist. He was a monk in the 11th century. Most people in the 11th century, say in France, believed that God existed. And if they didn't talk about it publicly, that's for sure. Um, and so he probably believes that God exists. He just doesn't think that this is a good argument. He's criticizing the philosophy. And let's look at his criticism. And what he's going to do here is going to construct an analogous argument that he thinks leads to a ridiculous conclusion. So he's going to talk about the lost island. And what he says is the lost island is the best island. So he's saying it's the best possible island. There's no greater island. That's really what he's saying. And of course, he picked the lost island because he knows it doesn't exist. It's an island from various medieval stories. And everybody knows the island doesn't really exist. And people go off and look for it all the time, but they never find it. Um, And what he's saying here, I'll read this one. He says, "Now, if anyone tells me that it is like this, I shall easily understand what is said, since nothing is difficult about it." He's saying we can understand in our mind what the lost island is, what the best possible island is. That idea is in our mind. It exists in our mind. So, he's going to do this thing like the fool, right? He's going to say, look, the idea is in my mind, but it's not out there in reality. He continues, "But if he should then go on to say, as though it were a logical consequence of this, you could not any more doubt that this island that is more excellent than all other lands truly exists somewhere in reality, than you can doubt that it is in your mind. And since it is more excellent to exist not only in the mind alone, but also in reality, right? Reality makes things better. Therefore, it needs be that it exists. If it's truly the best possible island, then it must exist in reality, because existing reality makes it greater." You can see the problem Gaunilo is having. You can use this argument to prove the greatest possible anything exists. The greatest possible sandwich must exist, because if it didn't exist, it wouldn't be the greatest possible sandwich. That's the problem that Gaunilo is having, right? If existence makes things greater and this is the greatest possible island, then it must exist. Gaunilo is saying Anselm's a fool for publishing this argument. "If I say someone wishes thus to persuade me that this island really exists beyond all doubt, I should either think that he was joking, or I should find it hard to decide which of us I ought to judge the bigger fool, I if I agreed with him, or he if he thought that he had proved the existence of this island with any certainty." And that's part of Gaunilo's objection, right? He's saying this argument doesn't work. It leads to absurd conclusions when you think about islands and sandwiches. And so the same form isn't good when you think about God. Now, someone like Anselm could object to this, and the objection could kind of work this way. The objection could say, look, there really isn't a greatest possible island, because an island's going to have trade-offs. Think of something like the greatest possible house. What's the perfect house? How many stories is it? There are benefits to a one-story house, benefits to a multi-story house. You can't have it be both. And so there is no perfect house, there is no perfect island, there is no perfect sandwich. But maybe there's a perfect being, right? And some can say, look, God is all powerful, all knowing, has all the perfections. And that really just raises another question. Is a perfect being even possible? Is it possible to be all powerful? Because this is going to lead to lots of paradoxes, right? Could an all-powerful being create another all-powerful being? Could they destroy one another? Paradoxes about power, omnipotence, paradoxes about knowledge, paradoxes about goodness. Lots and lots of paradoxes are going to flow from this idea that there's a perfect being that has all the perfections. And so the discussion of God's existence is really going to move to that discussion. Is a perfect being possible at all? And Anselm really hasn't argued for that. And people are debating this today, of course. All right, that's Gaunilo's objection. And we're done with that one.